to the regular business meeting of July 3rd. Halfan Squalum, Quees Talakamat, plus Squamish, or Whalemail. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have a very special presentation to kick off our agenda. And I'm just going to ask council, or someone on council, to move the Council of the District of Squamish. Didn't adopt the agenda. Move to adopt the agenda. I got excited there. Councillor seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. So first off, we have a presentation, and we have actually ratified this motion in camera. However, we would like to do it in the open meeting. So I'm looking for a motion that the District of Squamish confer the freedom of municipality to Lois Wynne in recognition of her service to the community of Squamish. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Elliott. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we're just going to... I'll just come up here. We're just going to take a moment to reflect on the legacy that Lois Wynne has in the community of Squamish. We did actually, at her retirement party, actually give her the key, the symbolic key on the plaque. But we also want to take this opportunity to speak about the work you and your team have done for the last 30 plus years at really creating a foundational base for social change and social movement in our community. We have a little gift for you if you want to come up, Lois. And I will, if someone wants to say a few words to Lois, please just let me know. I do want to recognize that we have another recipient of the Freedom of Municipality here, Corinne Lonsdale, who was mayor and a councillor for over 25 years in the District of Squamish. So it's great to have Corinne here to share in this. We don't do this very often. This is very special. So this, this is the wolf. And the wolf in the Coast Salish tradition is about loyalty. It's about family. It's about good communication. It's about education, understanding, intelligence. They're team players. They watch and protect the young and the old, and they offer support to the healing journey that people are on. And I can't think of a symbol more representative of you and what you've done for our community for 32 years. So I want to thank you on behalf of council and the community for the work that you've done. You took an organization that was just a handful of people with 1 or 2 programs into a robust social movement in the community that provides services for housing, there's a huge list, daycare, people who are looking for employment, skills, training. It's an endless list, and your legacy will continue. I thank you so much for your work. Thank you. Stand there and be embarrassed for a little bit longer. Maybe I'll invite Corinne Lonsdale up here to maybe say a few words. And yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman and Council. And you know, when Patty came and said, did I like to say a few words, she was thinking I'd like to talk a little bit about what an honor it is to be holding one of these keys to the city, or the freedom of the municipality. And it is. I think it's about the highest honor I was ever paid. So I thank you for that. But I really wanted to come up here and talk about Lois Wynne. Because way back when I was first elected mayor, and I think that was 1993, Lois was on the first committee that I struck. And I want you to, and that was to do with the youth and because that's something you didn't mention. But the youth center, huge input from Lois to get that going and support. And over the years, it was just one thing after another. Anything to do with family or youth, Lois would be on that committee or in that support group. And right up to the end, in 2001 or 2002, When I finished my stint as mayor, Lois was on the last big community committee as well, and that was the one that got us Quest University. And so I can't think of anybody more deserving than Lois for this honor. Good for you.
I'll just quickly read this so people understand what this is. This is from the community charter, and then I'll go to council to see if anyone would like to add some comments. Council may, by unanimous vote, confer freedom of the municipality on a distinguished person or a distinguished unit of the armed forces, which you're not, or another nation. Unless council revokes the honor, a person given freedom of the municipality or the commander of the armed forces unit, as applicable, is deemed to be an elector of the municipality and is eligible to be registered as such to vote in an election for mayor or councillor, and, despite any other enactments, if the person is a Canadian citizen, is deemed to be qualified to be nominated, be elected, and hold office in council. We're not holding it. But this is the highest honor that a municipality can bestow on its citizens. It dates back to a time when literally a key was given to the most trusted and honored people in a society or community to actually be able to get in the gated doors of a city. So it's a symbolic sort of throwback to a day when you actually would get a key. Don't try to open anything with that one. Councillor, anyone like to say a few words? Councillor Race.
Thank you. And actually, I was talking briefly with Lois just before this meeting started, and I said, my problem is that I actually remember when you started this job. It goes back a time when I met Rod as well. And so, since that time, our paths have crossed many times when I was in private practice and then when I was on council. And I think, as everybody knows, you've been passionate for your causes, and you are a force to be reckoned with, I can tell you right now, if you didn't know that, and somebody not to be denied with these projects. And so I learned that kind of quickly. But I want to thank you for all of the work you've done for our community. Good luck finding a lock that key fits, but
Pretty nice.
and it means you still have to pay for your parking tickets. So.
Yeah, I know in particular, I have the same sentiments as Councillor Race, meeting you years ago with your passion for the youth and your passion for community, in particular the Centerpoint project, and your determination to get that project done, and you completed that before you retired, and I really appreciate that. That was a fantastic project. It's really contributed a lot to the affordability of our community and ensuring that everybody has services under one roof. So for your service to the community, thank you, and deadly gratitude.
You have and continue to be one of our greatest assets.
So Lois, I've had an opportunity to work with you in my political capacity, but also professionally. And I think what stands out for me is what a model you are of leadership, that you build people up as you lead. You get things done through your passion by bringing people along. I've never seen you take someone down to get what you want. You've always done it in a really positive way. And you are a model of leadership in our community.
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Yeah, and I'd just like to thank you too as well. And one of the things that has stuck out in my mind in the last year or so was the Centerpoint. And you know, that was a long process, and I know you worked really hard to get that through. But the big thing to me is I see the people that it's helping, and I know them, some of them, and that's a really big thing. And if you lose that key, you know Corey's got this.
Linda, did you want to say a few words? I know you were on the board for a while.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working with Lois as a member of the board, albeit briefly, and then I think we also struck up a friendship during that time, so we're going to stay in touch. I don't think she's going to get off scot-free. But just very impressed and inspired by the leadership of one of our strong women in the community in Squamish.
Yes, and you know, I kind of echo the sentiment of Lois being involved right to the very end, right till retirement, and nothing was too small, nothing was too little for you to be involved, and I really appreciate the institutional memory that you've contributed as we took on the new housing task force and kind of helping us move that along. So thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who wants to say a few things? I know there's lots of people who have worked with her for a long time. You probably said it enough, but you're welcome to come up and share some words if you'd like. I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Mayor, oh, don't touch it. We get that. I'm in trouble already. Mayor and Council, thank you so much. You have no idea what an honor this is. I'm overwhelmed. And I can't help but say it's not just one person. I have had the most amazing people I've worked with, both staff and community and councils and volunteers, and that really is what's made the difference. But it's been an amazing career. I feel great leaving, knowing we've got Jay at the helm, and I have all my wonderful staff are still there. So more to come, but I am humbled, I am grateful, I'm lost for words. But thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
In your honor, we have cake.
Oh.
So we're going to take a few minute recess. Everyone, please join us in the lobby for a cupcake cake.
Wow.
Thank you, everybody. We are back in our regular business meeting, and I'm looking if there's any notices of motion. Seeing none, we have no delegations or petitions or proclamations. Any consideration of unscheduled public attendance, and is there an issue that someone needs to bring up that is of an emergent matter that can't be dealt with before, that needs to be dealt with before the next council meeting? Seeing none, we have two public hearings. First up is District of Squamish zoning bylaw, number 2200-2011 amendment bylaw 37781 Cleveland Avenue, number 2565 2017.
I'm in conflict on this one because it used to be my property.
And you have adjacent property?
Just go we cut these.
This public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in the proposed District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011 amendment bylaw 37781 Cleveland Avenue, number 2565 2017. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the Planning Department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Pardon me. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or action of members of council or any other persons addressing council. I now call on the Planning Department to introduce the bylaws.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. My name is Carrie Hamilton. I'm a planner at the District of Squamish. I'll be presenting to you tonight a rezoning amendment bylaw 2565 2017 for the property located at 37781 Cleveland Avenue for the purpose of public hearing. The property is currently zoned General Industrial I3 and currently houses a number of shipping containers for the presumable use of storage. Adjacent properties to the north and south both have I3 zoning, and the north property is currently a legal non-conforming single-family home, while the south property seems to exhibit general industrial and storage uses compliant with the I3 zone. The property is surrounded by light industrial I1 zoning to the east and the west. The property's entrance is uniquely located at the end of Cleveland Avenue. This portion of Cleveland Avenue is not built to today's streetscape standards and is currently used as driveway access to some Cleveland Avenue properties, as well as a pedestrian and cycling entrance to the Turtle Trail. This I3 site proposes to rezone to the new MUD 2 zone to permit 2 building mixed-use developments incorporating 5 residential apartment uses, roughly as you see here, and 270 meters squared of commercial space. The buildings are proposing to take advantage of 2 density bonuses written into the MUD 2 zone. One, the building facing Cleveland Avenue proposes 75% of 5-meter ground floor ceiling height to achieve a building height of 15.6 meters. The second one is the development proposes that 20% of the residential units will be dedicated rental, as per the MUD 2 residential density bonus to achieve 70% residential gross floor area. The building facing the lane is proposed at a height of 8.5 meters and offers 2 live-work units as well as 2 commercial units on the second story above an open parking garage. The proposal also includes a unique ground floor through block walkway and internal courtyard to provide pedestrian permeability through the site, as you can see identified by the red arrows here. The preliminary designs include all required 5 residential parking stalls and 1 required commercial parking stall to allow for a maximum of 5 cash in lieu commercial stalls, a total of $75,000 cash in lieu. A on-street front loading bay is proposed off Cleveland, and there are no variances proposed with this development at this time. This rezoning also includes an amendment to the MUD 2 zone to allow for a general increase of the zone's lot coverage from 55% to 60%. The applicant is offering to provide a voluntary community amenity contribution of $43,380. $34,704 will be placed in a fund of council's choosing, where the remaining $8,676 to be divided as per the policy into Park Amenities Fund and the Active Transportation Amenities Fund. The applicant has offered a blended offer, maintaining the 6-foot squared interim CAC policy contribution, which was the policy at the time of this application, and adding the $1.50 per square foot for park and active transportation for the new CAC policy. Breakdown of these numbers and CAC policy comparisons for further review can be found in attachment 1 and briefly summarized on the table on this slide. At both first and second reading, questions were raised around the access to Oceanfront and the history of its transition from Cleveland Avenue to Loggers Lane. This slide presents 4 rationales for the decision to remain Loggers Lane as the primary access to Oceanfront. They include recommendations from the Bunt and Associates 2012 Oceanfront Transportation Assessment, where they highlighted several constraints to Cleveland Avenue access. One of them being that the Cleveland entrance will require significant property acquisition and costs, and another being that the Cleveland entrance is highly uncertain due to the unknown environmental and economic implications and approvals for filling in the Catamount Slough. Cleveland is also considered a high pedestrian and commercial area, where Loggers will become more of the transportation priority corridor, as it is already designated our primary truck route. This leads itself to more efficient vehicle access to Oceanfront via the Loggers Lane entrance. Note that the report did not remove Cleveland Avenue as a consideration or potential secondary access in the future. However, these uncertainties and costs will still remain. So all that said, the rezoning will include upgrades to both Cleveland Avenue and the laneway from Vancouver Street to the south property line. These upgrades will be required at the servicing agreement and locked in through a land development agreement if this application proceeds to adoption. Basic upgrades to Cleveland Avenue will include pavement and drainage upgrades to accommodate safe emergency access and vehicle access for existing properties. And the upgrades will also include hard surface pedestrian access from Vancouver Street to the site, as well as some minor street furnishing and planting. Due to the small scale of this development, these improvements are considered necessary, modest upgrades, and potentially temporary. As other lots in the area redevelop, there will be more opportunity to review the current design and function of the Cleveland Avenue road right-of-way south of Vancouver and how this will interact with the downtown dike alignment. So the project was posted to the district's development showcase in December of 2017. 1 comment was received after first reading, and 4 more comments of support were received after the report and are attached in blue to your report package this evening. One of them also included some questions for review. Public information meeting was held on April 30th with a minor discrepancy in the mail out being sent 7 days prior instead of 10. 4 members of the public were present and due to a location map discrepancy in the newspaper ads, the original June 19th public hearing date had to be rescheduled for this evening, to this evening, and members of the public were still encouraged to provide comment on that June 19th date, and 2 comments of support were retained in the public records and can be found in your attachment 2 of this report. Public notification procedures were undertaken for a second time as per the public hearing requirements, and 2 newspaper ads were published with the appropriate location maps were published, and roughly 60 mail notifications and 60 delivery notifications were resent. So staff's recommendations subject to the results of public hearing are that council give 3rd reading to the amendment bylaw, amendment bylaw 2565, 2017 for 37781 Cleveland Avenue, and that subject to the results of the public hearing prior to the adoption of the amendment bylaw, that the following conditions be addressed, and that is for the provision of flood hazard assessment, as well as the registration of the flood covenant on the property, and the execution and registration of the land development agreement, which will secure the voluntary community amenity contribution, will secure the extended services needed for Cleveland Avenue and the laneway, and will secure the provisions for housing agreement to secure that 20% dedicated rental. The applicant, at this time I'd like to take a brief moment to share a quick flyby video. The applicant is prepared to demonstrate what the development look like. Oh, and I have to move this video.
Exit.
And this slide, yeah.
They would be so upset missing this.
Developments there, just to point it out. That concludes the presentation.
Council, any questions for clarification purposes at this point? I don't see any. I have one person. I have one person on the speakers list, Zany Benner, and then I don't have anyone else. So please, if you do want to speak to the public hearing, put your hand up. Please come up to the podium, state your name and your address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Hello, my name is Zanny Benner. I am representing myself. My address is 38361 Eagle One Boulevard. As a resident of Squamish and as an urban strategist consultant that focuses on business and financial strategy for community development projects, I value small-scale development projects like elevation collectives that promote business retention, growth, innovation via its live-work typology that is highly creative and has been sustainably designed. I greatly support this project because it supports small-scale developers in a time in Squamish that currently sees large outside developers heavily influencing our community with their large-scale development projects. Such large-scale development projects don't always design projects that respond to community needs and can further increase commercial real estate prices, which can be devastating to our local economy, forcing our small business owners to close or to truncate their business aspirations. It is necessary for our community to have a balance between large-scale development and small-scale development projects in order to foster a diverse local economy. Further, I love how this team is made up of Sea to Sky locals who live, work, and play in our community. They've carefully designed a development project that is truly created by the local people and for the local people. I think now is an appropriate time to allow small-scale local developers, not just the large-scale outside developers, shape our community and have a hand in developing the future infrastructure of Squamish. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Council, any questions on the application in front of us? Seeing none. There being no further speakers, I will ask for a second time. Is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations at this public hearing? And I'll ask for a third time. Is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? There being no speakers, I will now declare this public hearing closed. Council members are not permitted to receive further submissions or hear either a proponent or an opponent to an application once the public hearing is concluded. Any and all communications must be channeled to staff, and council can consider third reading later in this agenda if they so choose. The next public hearing is, I'll just read this statement out one more time. This public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500, 2017, Amendment Bylaw Oceanfront Peninsula Sub-Area Plan number 01, 2018, and District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw number 2200, 2011, Amendment Bylaw CD 69 Zone number 2602, 2018, and District of Squamish Phase Development Agreement Bylaw number 2387, 2015, Amendment Bylaw number 2603, 2018. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the planning department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or actions of members of council or any other persons addressing council. I now call on the planning department to introduce the bylaws. Oh yeah, no, Ted should come back in. Forever, Ted. We're in the second public hearing, sorry.
Good evening,
We
Mayor.
just missed the statement, but.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. My name is Elaine Naseby, and I'm a planner with Community Planning. This evening, I'm bringing forward 3 bylaws relating to the Oceanfront Peninsula. These bylaw amendments were given first and second reading on June the 19th.
Okay, you're in conflict on this one, too.
Excuse me.
Sorry. I forgot. Sorry, Councilor Pryor, you have to declare why you're in
I'm in
conflict.
conflict because I have adjoining property to the ocean.
Thank you.
Sorry,
That's funny. Please.
If approved, the bylaws would amend the official community plan, the Oceanfront Peninsula Zone, and the phased development agreement. An overview of the amendments is to increase employment use, density, and height, increase education use, and update the PDA to reflect amendments, well, to reflect these amendments, and to replace the original zoning bylaw with the district's current zoning bylaw. The Oceanfront Peninsula lands are located south of downtown on a peninsula bordered by the Mamquam Blind Channel to the east, the Catamount Slough to the west, and the Howe Sound to the south. The OCP and the zoning amendments apply to specific areas of the oceanfront lands but the PDA amendment applies to all the oceanfront lands highlighted in this image. The OCP amendment would amend the sub-area plan that was adopted in 2010. In 2015, maximum gross floor area amounts were included in the sub-area plan for each land use type, such as residential, employment, commercial, and institutional. So in 2015, a maximum gross floor area for employment use at the entire Oceanfront Peninsula was introduced, with a maximum 58,000 square meters. The proposed bylaw amendment would increase that to 78,000 square meters, which reflects a 1.5 floor area ratio across Block B. It would also increase building height from what is currently permitted at 3 stories on Block B, 2 stories on Block C, to 4 stories. So these two images describe that increase in height. The image on the top in yellow, sort of in that dotted square, the yellow colored lands were maximum 2 and 3 stories, and this amendment would make them 4 in the blue color in the image below. So the second bylaw amendment would amend the zoning bylaw, specifically the oceanfront zone CD69. So it also increases the height and density for employment use on blocks B and C, which you can see in that image. B is right in the middle. C is the purple block to the top of the screen from there, which reflects a floor area ratio of 1.5 and that 4-story maximum. It would also add education as a permitted use on blocks B and C1. So a bit more detail on the zoning amendment. Previously, residential use on the primary employment block was limited to 25%. And so this amendment proposes to change that percentage metric to a maximum gross floor area number, which reflects what had been previously approved at the 1.0 FAR. So although the intention of this bylaw amendment is to increase employment use and not residential. So it introduces a 7,087 square meter maximum GFA just for Block B. And then in terms of the height, wanting to not have 4 stories directly adjacent to the Cattermole Slough. So there's also a regulation brought into the zoning bylaw that for the land directly adjacent to the Cattermole, it would be maximum 2 stories, and then a third of the building, then it would step up to 4 stories. The third bylaw amendment for tonight's public hearing is the phased development agreement, or the PDA. And so the amendment here is that it reflects those 2 bylaw amendments I've explained. And also when the PDA was adopted, it sort of locked the zoning bylaw of the day into place. And there have been a lot of general zoning bylaw amendments since 2015. So it would update the phased development agreement bylaw with our current zoning bylaw. And then to do this, what's required is for the developer to sign in agreement with this change and also approval from the inspector of municipalities. 2 points of clarification from the council questions at June 19th, first and second reading. So the first was with regards to that maximum gross floor area for residential in the employment lands. I can come back and provide more detail if there's questions, but essentially I did explain earlier that just on Block B, there's a maximum gross floor area number, which is 7,087 square meters, but across the oceanfront lands, the residential gross floor area is limited to 291,000, which is a lot more because there's residentially zoned lands. So this shows how that calculation was arrived at. The second question related to student and faculty housing. So essentially, it is permitted on the dark blue blocks, the E, E1, and E2. It's the only form of housing that's permitted on Block E. And then on blocks E1 and E2, it allows student housing, but it also allows market housing. So for this, there was a public information meeting, April 18th. This public hearing for tonight was advertised in 2 editions of the chief paper, and notification was provided to neighbors. So the recommendation subject to the public hearing is that the 3 different bylaws be given 3rd reading tonight. There was a miscalculation in that residential maximum gross floor area number, and it's actually a reduction, and that's what this slide explains. So to give 3rd reading of bylaw number 2602, 2018 as amended, with the language on the screen, which reduces the number from 8,000 to a maximum 7,087 square meters. Thank you.
Council, any questions with the bylaws in front of us? I have a quick question about the E1, E2, and E zoning allowing market housing. Can you explain the rationale for that a little bit more and exactly how extensive that could be if maxed out? And we sold those lands with the intention of that being strictly educational campus. So I'm just trying to understand the rationale to include market housing.
Through you, Mayor Heinzman, I don't know, but I could look in the zone and try to find out a little bit more.
Because it's currently not allowed, correct?
The market housing is, when the zoning was approved, market housing is permitted on blocks E1 and E2.
Oh, so that's in the current zoning, okay. Questions, anyone? Councilor Ellis?
You know, in previous meetings, I asked questions about student housing, and that by allowing educational use in Block B, there was no requirement to provide any student housing. And the argument in the report is that students would be able to find apartments they could rent in a market, at market rents. And that still concerns me, because student housing is actually a crisis, and it was a 2016 election issue. And universities are still grappling with how to house students in a housing market that is unaffordable. So my concern is that this goes forward without a real commitment for that if education use goes into Block B, that there be some sort of requirement that a proposal for non-market student housing come with that change of use. Is there a way that we can improve that?
Through you, Mayor Heinzman, part of the rationale it is that there is market housing on the peninsula, but part of the rationale was also that it is an unknown at this point whether the education use will grow, and so if it does grow, it was felt that it would only really grow if there was student housing to support it, and so that could be addressed at that time.
Jonas, did you want to add to that?
Not really exactly what Elaine said, is that we don't know the state of how this land will be developed precisely, and so our expectation is that if a university is coming in, that they would be coming in on a condition that there's enough housing associated with the proposed facility. So the use is allowed on those 3 parcels, but we're not locking in the minimum amount.
So to be clear though, on Block E, we do require student and faculty housing because it's allowed use as education. But we're not doing the same on Block B. We're just saying, well, if it comes along, then we might require it. And so that's the confusing part for me.
To clarify, it's on Block E, it's not the only use that is allowed. It's the only residential type of use that's allowed there, but it could be other uses as well. Whereas E1 and E2 include just market apartments as well. So we don't have a minimum requirement right now in E. It's the only type that's allowed. when it comes to residential use.
I think because we recognize that students would require housing. But if we allow it on B, we're not saying the same thing. We're just going to leave it up to future council or future developer to propose or not propose student housing. I think the two are tied together. You can't expand educational use without accommodating students. And right now, it's not clear to me where they're being accommodated with this particular piece of the zone.
I think because we have a limited understanding at the moment of exactly what size an educational facility would be going in. So it's hard to determine what the future student needs are going to be and lock that in as a minimum.
So if we're changing the base development agreement, can we not also add a clause that says if education goes ahead in block B, that proponents must propose or include a plan on student housing? Like, is there another, we're changing them all if this goes ahead, so why can't we just add that use or that requirement somewhere?
We can probably add some language with the property owner's agreement to the phase development agreement, but it would, yes, I think we could actually do that at third reading.
Dr. Chappelle.
Thanks. That's what I was just trying to break out the student and faculty housing is only allowed on block E, and then E1 and E2 can be residentially zoned for market housing. But you're saying, I just wanted to be clear about the same fact that any use can go on block E except for residential market if there is housing built. Can we guarantee that there's housing built on block E for students? Can we guarantee that student housing is built and not allow any other use?
Through you, Mayor Smith, I don't believe that in the zone there's any condition of use of a specific number of housing that has to be built if a certain amount of education space is built. But on block E, the way that it's regulated is that it's the only form of housing that's allowed. But then on block E1 and E2, there's a further provision that they can also build market housing.
Are there any other uses for E besides student housing that can be used?
There's a list. It goes from A to O of list uses that are permitted on block E.
Can we narrow that down to only allowing student housing on block E? Would that be a massive change? Just to ensure that we have if we are allowing this amount we're changing it to increased density of education lands, we're going to require student housing. We have to zone for student housing and ensure that that zone stays for student housing, otherwise it won't be used for student housing. Otherwise we won't get any student housing. So we need to ensure that block E is not just saying it might be used for student housing, but guarantees the use for student housing.
Through you, Mayor Heisman, it was felt that an educational institution wouldn't develop unless there was housing, so it's in their best interest to ensure that.
Maybe we can ask Mr. Gomez, can you read out the uses that are in block E?
Block E? Sure. Okay, here we go. Permitted uses. Artisan, arts and culture, assembly, business and professional office, major as well as minor, cafe and coffee shop, childcare facility, education and training institution, including technical school, community college, or university, entertainment, neighborhood commercial, neighborhood pub, off-street parking and loading, park, student and faculty housing, and social services. And then blocks E1 and E2 have apartment dwelling, home occupation, loading and rooming house, townhouse dwelling, secondary suite. That's in addition to the other uses that are permitted in block E. But I think the other aspect that's also important is that blocks B and C are not limited to an educational use as well. They have a long list of uses under each. So at this point, we're looking to increase the employment density on those blocks, but we don't yet know exactly what uses are going to be going in.
So instead of student housing, it could be employee housing. So having some sort of form of housing there that's not market housing, if it's not used for student housing, it can still be employee housing, and it can be community-wide employee housing. I'm concerned with the same things that Councillor Elliott is concerned about, that we're building a mass amount of density. Now we're being asked to open our PDA, the community's PDA, that the community put forward.
So just invite for the public hearing, so try to keep it to questions.
Yeah, so that's trying to understand if it's possible to ensure that E is utilized for housing that is either employment or student housing.
I think we'd have to take that back to the applicant and negotiate it, because at this point we've been moving forward on, you know, on the principle of employment density being a positive thing, and so we haven't looked at exactly what uses are going to be going in, and then renegotiating blocks E1, E, and E2.
Question, yes, Councillor.
Are blocks E1, E, and E2 even part of this application?
No.
No. We're only dealing with C and B.
That's right.
Any other questions for clarification purposes?
By opening up the PDA to deal with B and C, does that open up the PDA? No, is it when you're opening up a community plan, a sub-area plan, to increase density, does it not allow for changes of use elsewhere to reflect the entire land use of the peninsula as opposed to just B and C?
Absolutely, it's a discretionary process for council.
Any more questions for clarification purposes from council? There being none, I don't have any speakers on the list for this public hearing, but if you'd like to speak this public hearing, please put your hand up and I will recognize you. I don't see anyone. I will ask for a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Yeah, come on up and state your name and your address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
My name's Taylor Wood, and I'm representing the developer this evening. We are located at 37749 Cleveland Avenue. I was just hoping that maybe Jonas could read the uses of block B and C, just for clarification purposes. As Jonas so mentioned, that those blocks are not guaranteed to be education. We are working hard and hope that we will use some of those blocks for education, but I just want to open that up to explain the other uses for those blocks, which we are also pursuing in our endeavors to develop the oceanfront, if that's possible.
Sure.
All right. So for block B, it is apartment dwelling, arts and culture, artisan, business and professional office, major as well as minor, cafe and coffee shop. Don't know why we made that distinction. Childcare facility, convenience store, entertainment, grocery store, home occupation, high technology, light industrial, and then it goes on to different types of light industrial, liquor store, off-street parking and loading, personal service establishments, post office, public parking, indoor recreation, research and development, restaurant, retail store, theaters and amphitheaters, tourist bureau, interpretive center, video production and rehearsal studios. So that's block B. That is a very open and wide list of uses. And block C, accessory residential dwelling, boat building and storage, boat launch, business and professional office minor, fabrication shop, general repair and service, interpretive center, marine-oriented tourist and recreation uses, marine service and repair, marine transportation infrastructure, marine park, marine retail and rental, marine-oriented office and training facilities, marine-oriented light industrial, off-street parking and loading, public parking without limiting off-street parking and loading, warehouse and storage facilities, and research and development. And then in C1, it allows for apartment dwellings, home occupation, loading and rooming house, townhouse, and secondary suite.
They still have rooming houses, right?
Yes.
Thank you. I will ask for a first time. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? And I'll ask for a third time. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Council, any last minute questions for clarification purposes? Seeing none, I will declare the public hearing closed. Council members are not permitted to receive further submissions or hear either a proponent or an opponent to the application once the public hearing has been concluded. Any and all communication must be channeled through staff. Thank you very much. If it's all right with council, I'll suggest that we move up 8BC, which is consideration of third reading for the two public hearings that we just had. The first one is consideration of 37781 Cleveland Avenue, and the recommended, or the motion council can consider, is that it be given third reading, and prior to adoption, the following conditions be addressed, and there's a number of conditions there I won't read them out. Is anyone who would like to move that? Moved by Councillor Blackman-Wolf, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Councillor Blackman-Wolf, do you want to speak to this application?
Yeah, I think it's just it's a good smaller scale development, and I'd like to see more of it in Squamish, so happy to see this go through.
Would anyone else?
Thank you. And this is, I think, is another example of where this, I hate the term, this mud zoning, this mud 2 zoning. Yeah, I know some like it, some don't, but really works in this area, and because this is very suited to the surrounding area. This is a land use decision, and I think this will fit into this neighborhood very well. And I always thought it was quite an imaginative design and use of the land, so happy to support this going forward.
Anyone else like to speak? Is that a hand or not?
Oh, I can't say anything that's already been said.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is a nice little infill development. Looking forward to seeing it being built. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. And next up, we have the official community plan bylaw number 2500 amendment bylaw Oceanfront Peninsula sub-area plan number 2603. And council can consider third reading. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by, I'll second that. Seconded by Councillor Kent. Councillor Race, do you want to speak to it briefly, and then I'll go to
Sure. And generally, I'm happy to support this because it provides more employment lands, which is obviously a place for greater employment and higher taxation, which is one of the goals of our oceanfront development. And it doesn't increase residential. And I take the point of the discussion beforehand about the university, and if education facilities move down there, and where would the students be housed? And I think, you know, when you look at the flex lands around there, the C, I think it's the C1 zone, which has residential, the other two E zones, I think if the university or an educational facility is going to move there, it would make sense to me that they would be concerned about student housing and want provision for student housing, and so that would just come part and parcel with it. There are, of course, no guarantees that there will be education. There are a number of other uses, as staff pointed out, so we don't know yet. So for me, it is premature to lock in student housing in an area where there might not be students. That just necessitates a further application. So I think there's lots of room to put students down there if the development requires it and the developer and the educational facility want it. So I will support this at this stage.
Just a reminder that this is the OCP one. If you want to speak specifically to the zoning piece or the PDA piece.
I was speaking to all three of them.
That sounded like an all three, but if it's specific to the zoning or PDA, maybe reserve those comments for those particular topics. It's general statements, happy to entertain them now. Councillor Scott. Sorry, Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Scott.
I just want to check with staff that if I want to make a motion to amend the PDA, that it doesn't impact the OCP piece of the zoning.
The PDA is a bylaw as well. That's subject to the same process. So no, it wouldn't impact the OCP or the zoning, but it would impact the PDA bylaw.
Right. Okay. So I can vote for the OCP and the zoning bylaw, but still make an amendment to the PDA.
I believe so.
Councillor Scott?
Thanks, yeah, I'm not going to speak on the OCP, I'll speak on that.
I'll call the question on the OCP. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next, council can consider District of Squamish zoning bylaw 2020 amendment bylaw C69 zone number 2603. To be given a third reading as amended by deleting and inserting as follows. I'm not going to read it, but it's on the agenda. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Councillor Race, you have your hand up first if you'd like to speak to it.
No, it's the same comments, I won't repeat them.
And anyone else on the zoning bylaw? Call the question, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And lastly, the District of Squamish Phase Development Agreement bylaw number 2387, 2015 amendment bylaw number 2603. Council can consider third reading. And there is a qualifier prior to adoption. It's in the agenda, but there are conditions. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by, I'll second that. Councillor Elliott?
I wanted to propose an amendment for this piece, which is that a statement in the phase development agreement that says in blocks where education is allowable use, that a plan for student and faculty housing is what?
Submitted.
Is submitted along with any, I guess it's not zoning, is it? The development permit or?
Maybe I'll,
Development permit.
I think you understand the intention of what Councillor Elliott was trying to say. How would you articulate that?
So I don't want to lock in housing. I just want to make sure that we don't bring in a use in more zones that we don't have a plan for.
Perhaps if an educational facility with student housing needs is proposed, that a student housing plan be submitted with the development permit.
That would be lovely.
Is there a second for that amendment? Seconded by the amendment by Councillor Chappelle. I think we've spoken to it already, if that's all right. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Wait, but opposed.
Opposed to the amendment? Motion carries. On the, Councillor Race, pardon me, Councillor Race opposed. On the motion as amended, I'll just speak to this briefly. I think all of these changes are to facilitate or enable the success of an educational facility down here. And so I'm happy to support all three of them, happy to support this one. I do think any educational facility will need to consider student housing, so I'm happy to have that language in there as well.
I'd also, I'm happy for the increased employment density. I look forward to seeing if it's used for educational facilities. I look forward to seeing that as well. I do think that any either employment or education use requires, we're at a point in our housing conundrum that we really require housing for employees and students, and that the student housing, hopefully, if it comes forward, could also be used as employment housing.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Councillor to speak.
Yeah, and I oppose the amendment because of what I said before. And so I'm going to support this, although to be frank, I'm not sure of the effect of this because a phased development agreement is between the municipality and the developer, and the municipality can say one thing, but both parties ultimately have to agree to it, so I'm not really sure where that will leave us if the developer is not keen on that particular restriction. But nevertheless, I'll support it at this point.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Black and Wolf or Councillor Race, can we look at you? Councillor Pryor wants to join us or not? Bear with me for a second. second. Sorry about that. Moving on in the agenda, we are now on first three readings, consideration of District of Squamish, Brennan Park Arena. Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong page. We are on first and second reading consideration, and first up we have District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw 2500, 2017, Amendment Bylaw, Garibaldi Springs, number 2613, 2018.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm here to introduce Susan Stratus and Dave Merrill, Dave Merrill is our Director of Major Projects, and Susan Stratus is a contract planner working for the district reviewing this application, and will be making the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. What we're looking at tonight is providing an overview of the new development application for the Garibaldi Springs site and bringing forward the OCP and the zoning amendment bylaws for first and second reading. And just to clarify, it's a new application with new bylaws. So just looking at the overall history of this project, it began in 2016 when the earlier OCP and rezoning applications were submitted along with technical reports. 2 open houses were held in 2016. Moving into 2017, there were a number of council and committee meetings reviewing the project and 2 pop-up events for public input. And then in 2018, in the black print, was the process with the previous bylaws that were given first and second reading in January, first reading in January, second reading in March, public information meeting in April, public hearing in late April, and then in May, when the bylaws were brought back for third reading, they were defeated. So the applicants submitted a new application on May 22nd and held a public information meeting on June 25th. And that brings us to tonight for consideration of first and second reading. So the public input on the new application from the public information meeting a couple of weeks ago, we have received about 20 written responses so far, and they are still coming in, so I haven't provided a detailed summary of them yet. But the key issues that were raised, there was quite a bit of concern with the reapplication process and the new application coming in so quickly. Impacts on habitat loss and on the habitat. A number noted that this was premature development and other areas should be infilled first. Quite a few comments on overall growth with traffic, schools, and the large rate of development that Squamish is experiencing. 1 or 2 comments that community benefits that are being proposed should not influence decisions, and there was some comment on the profits that the developer is potentially making. I will provide all of these responses as part of the package prior to public hearing once we've assembled them all. So looking at the proposed development, I think what I'll do tonight is just concentrate on what's changed. There have been some significant shifts in the project. The ecological reserve has increased to 36 hectares. The old numbers are circled in red on the right-hand side. Previously, it was just over 32 hectares. The residential was 12.8 hectares, and that's now gone down to 10.5 hectares. The park remains the same. The clubhouse site remains the same. The Newport Road was 0.6 hectares, and now it's 0.12, and that is because only a very short section of the Newport Ridge Drive is being constructed. And the Newport Ridge parking lot that was previously proposed as an amenity for the district has been deleted from the plan. So those are the main changes. And just looking at the map, what has changed significantly is Parcel C used to spread out here between the 2 streams, and it was developed on kind of small parcels in amongst the forested area. So Parcel C has become a very small little area here, but housing has been added to Parcel D. And just looking a bit more closely at that, you can see the previous plan, the large areas that comprised parcel C, they're now gone, leaving a much bigger habitat area in the middle here. The Tantalus Road entrance has also been removed. Part of the significant impacts on the previous plan was there was a roadway needed to run through here to service parcel C. So with the removal of those parcels, again, it opens up the central area quite a bit for improved habitat. The parking lot, as I mentioned, has gone here. The active parks remain the same. The community park is here, and you can't see them very well, but there are 3 small little active parks still proposed. Parcel D, the housing is increased quite a bit. This is the previous one that had a pond in the middle. So this area is mostly filled in with housing now. One of the ponds is filled in completely, and one of the others is partially infilled. And the Newport Ridge Drive is just a little stub here. Now, Dave will maybe speak to this later, but ultimately the district may or may not still want to construct the extension of Newport Ridge Drive. In the previous plan, the developer was proposing to dedicate it right to the edge of the property, although not build it. In the new plan, this will all be district-owned land, so they will dedicate and build the portion needed to serve parcels C and D, and it will be the district's call whether anything further happens regarding Newport Ridge Drive. So just looking at the OCP designations, one of the things since the previous application, the new OCP has now been adopted. The majority of the site remains designated parks, greenway corridors, and recreation. The clubhouse and hotel parcels were changed in red there. They are now designated highway and tourist commercial. And the surrounding areas remain residential neighborhood, and further over to the east, future residential neighborhood. In the new OCP, Growth Management Schedule C does include the subject property within the growth management boundary. And I guess looking at the policies of the OCP has a very broadly based growth management boundary, and it does not require sequential development, for instance, from the downtown out. All of the areas within the growth management boundary are anticipated to develop. So looking at the land use concept on the colored plan, the housing units have been reduced from 350 to 310, distributed between the 4 parcels I had just outlined. And the phasing remains the same, beginning at the north, parcel A, parcel B, then C and D at the south end. The overall residential density within these parcels is relatively low, working out to about 12 units to the acre, which is, I guess, today on the lower side for a townhouse development. The majority of the land, 78%, is again proposed to be dedicated to the district for ecological reserve and park use. The housing mix is somewhat similar to what was proposed before. Again, the distribution of housing units that I've circled in red has changed quite a bit, with very few in parcel C and quite a few more in parcel D. And the plan does still propose 18 affordable rental units and 18 lock-off suites in parcel B. So I'll just quickly run through these. These two haven't changed too much. Parcel A with 60 units remains very much the same as it was originally proposed. I would mention at the public information meeting recently, we did hear some new concerns from residents along the Rockridge interface, and we will be following up both with the applicants and the neighbors there to just understand those concerns a bit further before the public hearing. Parcel B remains the same. It has 105 units with townhouses, duplexes, and 3-story townhouses. Parcel C is a very small little node with approximately 26 townhouses near the Newport Ridge Drive extension here, and you can see it has a turnaround, so that's where it ends at this point. And parcel D is where most of the additional development goes. There is the remainder of one of the ponds here. It's relatively flat. And as I mentioned, one of the ponds there is to be filled. So the proposed trail network has changed. There are now 3.1 kilometers of public trails compared to 4.3 kilometers previously, so the trails are reduced. Internally, in red and green, there are 1.9 kilometers of strata trails within those housing parcels. And the final trail locations, the surfacing and lighting is to be determined during the environmental DP process. Staff want to have a really careful look on the ground at the actual layout of these public trails. And just to compare previously, you can see on the previous plan there was a large trail coming down through here, so that's been eliminated in the new plan. And a number of the trails down through the southern area, south of Megan Creek, have also been eliminated. So this really favors the habitat protection in both of these areas. It helps with the continuity, contiguous habitat in both those areas compared to the previous design. So the maintenance costs are similar to what was originally proposed. Polygon will maintain the ecological reserve improvements, which are the ones that are required as habitat compensation for the first 5 years. The district will be responsible for maintaining all community parks and trails, some of which are in that ecological reserve. Park funding proposal is the same, that the new tax base, the general taxation, will pay into the park's maintenance costs, but the land development agreement will specify that Polygon will cover the outstanding amount, basically a decreasing share for Polygon until the units are fully built out, at which point it's paid through the tax base. The preliminary cost estimates we have kept the same at $150,000 a year, which represents 3.5% of the current Parks and Rec service budget. That's probably a pretty generous cost estimate at this point because the amount of trails has decreased. And these aspects will be secured in the land development agreement. So parking, the residential units and their visitor parking will be constructed to bylaw standards. The public parking has been reduced. There were previously 225 spaces that is now down to 160 spaces, primarily because there has been a loss of that parking lot off Newport Ridge Drive, and with less road development through the site, there were a number of spaces adjacent to those roads that were intended as public parking. The proposed community benefits, the applicants have kept the majority of the previous commitments, and I'll just look at the new application numbers. The ones circled in red are where there are changes, and so they're still proposing just over $3 million in CACs at the current rate of $6 per square foot. 18 affordable housing units have been assigned a value of $2.5 million. Off-site trail construction, the corridor and Wonderland trails are still proposed. The daycare constructed on site valued at $750,000. And I should mention that the daycare, the actual use, the number of children in that daycare has not at all been determined. What's being contributed is a space built to bylaw standards for that type of use. And it's up to the daycare providers in terms of what types of children and ages they want to service. With the really young children that were being talked about, you actually get very few children in that space, but older children don't have the same requirements, so you would have more children if you were serving older age groups. Off-site traffic improvements. Originally, there was proposed to be a right-in, right-out at the highway. That has now been taken off the list, and the cash contribution is being proposed instead. That right-in, right-out is not proposed to be constructed, which Dave will mention in a minute. So the Newport Ridge parking lot is off. Ecological reserve improvements have increased to $2 million from 1.3, and that balances out with the decrease in the public park improvements because there is less public trail and more habitat areas. and the public art component remains the same at 100,000. So the total is slightly less at 11.9 million. It works out to around $25 per square foot total. Looking at the environmental review, we have received updated bioinventory report and habitat balance reports because there have been some significant changes. Again, it is a complex site with high environmental values. The district has engaged a third-party, independent, qualified environmental professional to do a peer review on the submitted reports. We haven't had their return reports yet, but we will have that before public hearing. And just to reiterate, there are no senior agency environmental approvals required at the rezoning stage. Any changes to the riparian habitats, ponds, etc., will require approval from the province and DFO as part of the environmental DP process, which follows after the zoning process. So I won't look at this too closely. I think we had gone through this before, but the basic premise is to locate development in previously disturbed areas and revegetate both riparian and non-riparian habitats. Overall, there's a net gain through many aspects of the design. And I'll just move along to the table that shows how the numbers work out in the habitat balance. With riparian habitat, there are two types. There's the riparian habitat and what's called contiguous non-riparian habitat, which is the area in parcel D that provides moderate quality habitat for the Pacific water shrew. So there is a loss of some habitat with the ponds there. The gains are 4.9 hectares. So overall, there is an increase of 1.75 hectares of riparian habitat when the compensation is provided for these two losses. The previous proposal had a net increase of 1.15 hectares, so there's a fairly substantial net increase in riparian habitat. And in aquatic habitat that is not riparian, there is a similar gain of 1.06 hectares, which is more than double the previous 0.37 hectares of habitat. So just overall, there is a significant habitat gain with the reconfiguration of these parcels. Let's move this over to Dave.
Yes, I'll speak to site servicing, access, and traffic impact assessment. So the site is proposed to be serviced with water and sanitary sewer from existing municipal services located on Dowd Drive and Newport Ridge Drive. The internal roads and services within the development are proposed to be strata owned and maintained. Access to the site will now be provided by two locations instead of three previously. One is shown on the top of the image there from Dowd Drive, and at the bottom of the image by Newport Ridge Drive. And Phase B, which is shown there corresponding to the 105 units, because that's a long access road from Dowd into and down into that development, there will be an emergency access and egress point provided there, which will essentially be a pedestrian and bike multi-use path that in the event of an emergency, if the main access is blocked, emergency services can use that to access Phase B. Newport Ridge Drive, as Susan had mentioned earlier, it's no longer proposed to be dedicated as a road. However, the layout of the development will be such that if in the future the district decides to make a connection from Newport Ridge Drive further to the east, there will be no major hindrances to do so. Also, as Susan mentioned, the applicant has proposed to remove the previously proposed right-in, right-out access to the highway at Newport Ridge Drive. I will say that the traffic engineer is currently updating the traffic impact assessment, and an assessment of whether that is acceptable will be completed at that time. Speaking of traffic impact assessments, we have a slide here. It's very similar to the previous application. There are a few bit of information in red, which is reflective of the previous proposal. So as was previously contemplated, the actual addition of this traffic is relatively minor compared to the future development and traffic volume generated by developments in the area. The graph on the right shows in red the number of vehicle trips generated during peak hours, Friday PM on the left and Sunday afternoon on the right. The numbers in the middle, so the dark green or dark blue lines there, that's the proposed developments in the area, the number of vehicle trips generated. So as you can see, even with the previous proposal, but even less so with the current proposal, the number of trips generated by this development itself are relatively minor. There is no change to the number of vehicle trips per minute generated by the development along Tantalus. At peak hours, it'll be about 2 to 3 vehicles per minute additional at Tantalus and Dowd, and 3 to 4 additional vehicles per minute at Tantalus and Port Ridge Drive. And as mentioned, the traffic engineer is currently updating their report to reflect the revised application, and we will have that information before public hearing.
So just moving on to the two bylaws, the OCP amendment bylaw number 2613 proposes to redesignate the 4 blue parcels, the 4 blue areas from Parks, Greenway Corridor and Recreation to residential neighborhood, and the remainder of the property, 78%, remains dedicated Greenway Corridors and Recreation. The OCP amendment looks a bit more complicated, but it is essentially the same plan. We are proposing a new RM4 zone for the blue areas to reflect the types of housing units that are proposed. A new P4 zone applies to the green areas, which are the height, I guess our coloring is a bit off here. Better change this actually before we move the bylaw forward. There's 2 colors of green that are all going to be P4, which is this color green and the bright green, which are district-owned parcels that were dedicated some years ago when the golf course was built. The P4 zone is an ecological reserve zone that has a very restricted range of uses. The P3 zone applies to the community parks and the 3 smaller park sites on the east side of the site. And the clubhouse remains zone CD12, which does provide for daycare use within the current zoning. So in terms of policy review, again, going through this application under the new OCP policies, the planning department considers it to be consistent with the OCP natural areas policies in that it provides for protection and restoration of natural areas with significant habitat values. It is also consistent with the natural areas policies regarding protecting sensitive ecosystems, including species and ecosystems at risk. The proposal minimizes habitat loss and fragmentation, rehabilitates and enhances previously degraded areas, and it does provide ownership of ESA, public ownership of ESA lands. The proposal is considered to be consistent, generally consistent with OCP smart growth principles. It is within the smart growth management boundary and provides compact infill development that is not much of a change in density from surrounding areas. It provides a range of housing options, including affordable housing, which is part of the smart growth principles. So the recommendations are that the 2 bylaws, zoning and OCP amendment, be given first and second reading, and that a public hearing be scheduled for Thursday, September 6th at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much. Councillor Race.
Thank you. In the previous proposal, the conservation areas were going to be protected by a covenant. Is that still the case?
Through the mayor, yes, there will still be a land development agreement that that will preserve those areas in addition to the zoning itself. So yes, the land development agreement would still be structured to preserve those, and as part of that, there would be the third-party signatory, which we're still working on.
Right. And that was my concern. Not that we have a third-party signature on it, but the dedication of the Newport Ridge extension, the Newport Drive extension, from the developer's point of view, a dedication is a dedication, so it really doesn't matter to them. But it's how I think internally we handle it. But if a third signature was required to take it out of a conservation area, if one day we did decide it would make a good road, that may be problematic. And so I would just point that out to staff. Either we keep it out of that covenant, or we have an exception in the wording of the covenant so that we could, if the district chose to do so, dedicate it as a road in the future, because a conservation society may not agree to that otherwise. And the reason I say that is just because, I guess just almost as a matter of general policy, I think it's a little risky to give up potential road right-of-ways. The only other potential access is Dowett Drive, and sometime in the future that either may not be sufficient or may not be appropriate. So I just wouldn't want to give up the possibility of Newport Drive being extended at this point.
I have a couple questions, but one, you said, I believe it was in Area D at the bottom there, that they were planning on filling in one of the ponds partially. And should they decide to do that, that would require DFO approval?
Yes.
And is that pond specifically fed by Meakin Creek, or is it salmon bearing at all?
There are two ponds here. One, and I wish I could zoom in a bit better, one is an aesthetic pond, and one is a fish-bearing compensation pond that was they were both constructed during the golf course development. And I think initially only the compensation pond shown in blue was meant to contain fish, but the ponds have become connected to the various tributaries that exist around there, and they both do contain fish. So the compensation that the applicants will have to do in creating this additional housing will have to compensate for that loss. And they have calculated that as part of their habitat balance number.
And if I may follow up then,
yep.
Do they expect to have DFO answer back or approval or whatever that case may be by September 6th, which is the public hearing date?
Through the mayor, no. The process is that the bioinventory report and habitat balance report are submitted to the district as part of the rezoning process. They don't at this stage get forwarded to any of those agencies. They don't want to review them until they know the zoning is approved and getting into detailed design and pre-construction. That has always been DFO's and now the province's position. There are no approvals needed before the zoning is adopted. It's a bit of an unusual situation, but as I understand and what the applicants have referenced in the bioinventory report, they have been in communication with DFO through this process. I think they have a fairly clear picture of what's approvable. And if not, they won't be building as many houses. That's just the reality. But no, there is no DFO approval at this stage. The environmental development permit is what triggers DFO and provincial agency involvement.
And so they simply have to build fewer homes if they didn't get DFO approval for them?
That's correct.
Councilman, do you have a few more?
Well, my other question was regarding the write-in, write-out and the removal of that. So the impact study we would expect to see back by September 6th as well?
That's correct.
Councilor Spell?
Thanks. I'm interested in the 160 new parking stalls, how that was calculated, including street parking. The 110 spaces are already existing on 10 Plus Road. Those are existing designated district parking spaces. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, the There is parking located further to the south on Tantalus. I believe there's a wide median along the section sort of from the hotel to the north, and I don't believe that there's formal parking in that stretch of Tantalus. So as part of this, the bike lanes that are currently on the street will be removed, and there will be a dedicated extension to the corridor trail built on the west side of Tantalus, and that will free up space for these additional parking spaces along each side.
Paid for by the developer.
That's correct.
And the 30 stalls in the hotel parking lot. So I guess my concern is 40 spaces in the clubhouse parking lot. So those are spaces that are already existing as well. And my concern is that there's no new parking created, and the 10 spaces filled up, and the strata parking, which isn't available to the public.
So just to clarify, the 40 spaces for the proposed parking, a bunch of that was going to be lost because the road was going through there?
Yes, through the mayor. Yes, originally in the previous proposal, the 40 spaces didn't exist, and that's why the Newport Ridge Drive parking lot was provided to compensate for those. So now that the road is no longer going through, the 40 spaces of the clubhouse will be available as public parking. Right now they are not public. They are private commercial parking. So as part of the land development agreement, that will be one of the aspects that will be secured. And similarly, the pull-off spaces on strata roads, I agree, 10 is not a lot, but the strata roads are pretty tight because of habitat protection. There is space for 10, and those will also be secured in the land development agreement as being publicly accessible.
How can we, can I just ask a question? So I'm not sure how we can publicly say that the public is allowed in strata corporation and insurance. How is that? There is no other strata that you can drive in and utilize the public spaces.
Well, if I may, it would be done through a covenant that would not allow those strata, the parking on strata roads to be allocated to any strata units or visitor parking. So it'd probably be servicing as visitor parking for some of the strata units, but it would be open to the public.
And who maintains those then? Does the strata maintain those?
Yes. Yes, part of the strata road system that is publicly accessible.
Publicly accessible, but maintained by strata, insured by strata.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for clarification purposes, Council? Don't see any. Consideration of first and second reading for the OCP. Is there someone who would like to move that? Moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Race. Councillor Elliott, want to speak to it?
I think this new proposal is an improvement on the old one, and I think it provides a fantastic amenity in terms of the park, and I really want the public to comment on it. So happy to send it to public hearing.
Can I ask more? I wasn't done with my
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see any more hands. Go ahead.
The daycare amenity, can you show the daycare amenity? It's $750,000 on 2,500 square feet. I'm not sure how that works out. That's like 12 children. Basically, if it's 2,500 square feet in the downstairs in the daycare, we don't have a provider. So that's basically 12 families that get an amenity of $750,000. That's like around $62,000 per child. How was that worked out?
Through the mayor, well, the cost of renovating is based on the existing space. It's the lower floor, the full lower floor of the clubhouse building, minus any mechanical equipment that is there. And that was the estimated cost from the applicants based on standard building permit values for upgrading 2,500 square feet. The space right now is not at all to code for assembly use, particularly the special requirements for childcare. So that deals with the cost. In terms of the number of children might vary quite a bit. There are quite a few daycare providers interested, as I understand it,
but one of the deficiencies that has been identified when the applicants met with Community Services, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name of the agency, was that there is no daycare available for infants, for really young children, and that was considered to be a possible fit here. If you are going for that very young age group, you don't get very many children. They need they need nap space, they need active space. It may be that you get 10 or 12 infants, or you might get 30 or 40 children in different age groups. And it all depends on the health unit requirements for space and staffing and so on. So there is no fixed number at this point. It's going to be written into the land development agreement that this be secured for future use by a nonprofit daycare provider. And it's going to be up to further discussions as to what age groups of children end up being in there.
And are those 40 spaces included in the daycare parking as well?
The daycare has 5 of those spaces assigned. Yes.
And one last question, who is responsible for the ongoing maintenance and upkeep of that building?
That will be the responsibility, that will be between the owner of the building and the daycare provider to come up with a suitable arrangement like any other kind of tenancy would.
We do have a motion on the floor, but I obviously will entertain questions if council still has questions. Councillor Rees.
No, I was going to speak to the motion.
You're welcome to speak to the motion.
So I think, as most people know, I supported the previous application. This is probably in many respects even better than that one. And so I will, of course, be supporting this. There were concerns previously about the center area, some wildlife connectors and so forth, and I think that, from my perspective, has been largely eliminated by this density, which, in my view, it was dense to start with, but it is now even less. And so I'm happy to support this at this stage and send it off to public comment for the public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Beckenwell.
I'm not going to support first and second reading on this application. I did not support the previous iterations of this project. More so than that, I think for me, there's a concern around process here. The concern that this is a misuse, bringing back a project for a do-over. I'm just not comfortable with that. I think that if we do go through a very significant, long process with community, I think the community needs to be confident that the result will be respected. And I feel in this case, I think the vote was clear. And I do think that I don't see that there has been much change, and I'm concerned about the ability of people to be kind of tired out on process. Individuals take time out of their day, volunteer their time, and they may get tired out, whereas an applicant, if there's money on the line, so they're going to be here all the time. And I'm very, very concerned about the message this sends. While it may be technically kosher, I think it doesn't send a good message that our council, what we should be sending is a message to applicants to bring their best foot forward the first time around, not second or third time, hoping that they can get away with something that's not very acceptable to the community. So I in good conscience support first and second reading at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Chanel, then Councillor Kent.
Yeah, I think I've been pretty clear on my adherence to OCP principles, and we voted that document in after a very extensive public process. Our public respects greenway corridors and sensitive habitats, and to maybe look at this project in the future when we haven't used up our infill. But after we've used up our infill, I believe in infill development within infrastructure and density within infill development to remove sensitive habitat and build on sensitive habitat. This project does not meet any criteria for me to open up a document that was just recently passed to be looking at an OCP amendment to remove greenway corridors with, as well as the public process being adhered to, I can't support first and second reading as well. Without a traffic impact assessment, without DFO approval for infilling ponds that are fish bearing. These waterways and watercourses are incredibly sensitive habitat, and to have public amenities and CAC contributions that actually meet community needs, not just this particular application and area's needs, appropriate parking, appropriate, I'm even not sure of how the strata will afford this mass amount of infrastructure in the future. I can see us being on the line for this infrastructure in the future, because to pay for the road upgrades and infrastructure that this project builds will require significant funds, and to think there's going to be money left over after saving for infrastructure renewal, especially because we're building on sensitive and permeable habitat, is ridiculous. To think that $150,000 a year will maintain these lands, I don't think is appropriate to put on the entire community. This coming back when I thought I saw it a few weeks ago and turned it down then, really, I completely concur with Councillor Blackman Wolf that it's definitely not in the public's best interest to be worn down like this by projects coming back over and over again outside of the 6 months that it's appropriate to bring the project back. So I will be voting against this.
Okay.
Yeah, the same concerns I voiced when this came before us last time, and I still support, and I will be voting against this. Infill, traffic issues, riparian, and not least process. Just can't vote for it.
Councillor Carr.
Never a dull moment. I have to say that, you know, some of the comments I've heard, I wish I had time to debate, because some are stretching the truth a little bit. Or I thought that the process we went through, we came to a vote and it was very clear. There was people in the community that weren't satisfied, and the vote went to the mayor saying she did not like certain aspects of it, and because of all that complaint, because of all the input, it came back, and in my opinion, it's much better. Look at the green space. Look at that amenity that we're getting. If you can deny that amenity to the community, I just don't get that. Anyway, so I was very pleased when, I was very unhappy when it didn't pass last time, because to me, that 77 acres of land, I wanted to see the community own that. And it didn't pass last time. I was depressed, because I thought it might never come back, we might never get a chance, and it did come back. When I saw this, with nothing in the middle, wildlife corridor, you know, like people were going, there's no wildlife corridor, this long development. Anyway, I could not in any way say that that wasn't a way better. Way better. So I'm sorry to my colleagues that don't support it, that don't see it that way, and I'm happy to support it, because hopefully the community will say, gee, this is a pretty good amenity. Look at that big space, look at that habitat in there. You know, and to the ponds that were created on a golf course can be recreated into habitat. It's not saying that they're sensitive habitat. They're sensitive habitat in the middle of a golf freeway, you know? So, anyway, I am going to miss this job.
Briefly to this, or did you want to go? Go ahead.
If you want to,
Go ahead.
yeah, I just, the community amenities, for, you know, I really don't feel responsible opening up the OCP in order to build what I see as townhouses without the appropriate affordable housing amenity, with the Tantalus Fire Hall falling down right around this development and no amenities being given to actually rebuild the fire hall. And looking at the numbers, the margin is just not there for the community. We could have, the community amenity contribution for the park actually indebts our community after 5 years to paying for process. And we will be responsible for maintaining the park, whereas right now, it's greenway corridors and recreation that is left without buildings on it or infrastructure that we have to maintain. So it's, and we have a fire hall that's being held up by sticks. We have great needs in this community. And, to look at these numbers, it's, and to include $750,000 for daycare construction on the site, a lot of these site improvements, 18 affordable houses out of 310, that's just ridiculous, considering what we're being asked to do is open up our official community plan after after years of engagement. And I didn't hear a single person say, please rezone our green space because we need more housing. I heard everybody say, add more density into existing neighborhoods where we can afford to maintain our infrastructure. This is no different. This is a place that has no infrastructure. It's at the edge of infrastructure like other places in our community, and we can't afford this. And to have it be on permeable surface, and yeah, ponds can be replaced, but when you build up fish habitat, and then people are, there's articles in the newspaper calling it fish kill if 1 or 2 fishes are killed, and yet we're going to fill in an entire pond that is connected to a natural habitat. There's 2 species at risk on this piece of land. I get that there's a massive piece of dedicated park, but it was being left, it's been offered to this community in its entirety before, with no other housing build, just for some densification on Lot A. And for whatever reason, this council turned it down before, and I respected that. And now it's, it'll be brought forward in an inappropriate way, with the community not having the the community will be absolutely worn down by public process here. And I just find it sad. Equally it's sad, Councillor Clark.
Thanks. I'm going to support first and second reading. I think this project has enough value to go to public hearing and hear what the public has to say. I think it's a vast improvement compared to the previous proposal. With regard to process, the intention of the community charter, is it the local government act, I can't remember which one, is to avoid nuisance applications, that a developer puts something forward, he gets rejected, he immediately submits the same application. This is in no way contradictory to that. It absolutely meets the criteria for considering a new application. I would like to understand the 2 ponds. My understanding is that they're designed in such a way that they heat up too quickly, there's no shading, and the report talks about it. And I don't necessarily have to have all those questions answered here, but for the public hearing, I think we should understand the habitat that's in those ponds today and the benefit, or the theoretical benefit we're getting through the proposal. So I would like to understand that a little bit better. I'm not going to go into debating the merits or the downfalls of this proposal at this time, but I certainly think it is worth considering sending it to third reading and a public hearing. I don't see any more hands. I'll call the question on the OCP. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Kent, Councillor Chappelle, and Councillor Blackmore will oppose. Motion carries. And there's also the zoning bylaw that goes with this project. Would someone like to move it? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor. I think we've discussed this enough. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Blackmore, Chappelle, and Kent opposed. Motion carries. So the public hearing on that will be September 6th at the Brennan Park Recreation Center. Next up, we have District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw General Amendments number 6. Why don't we take a 3-minute recess just to allow that on. We are at the District District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 25/2017 Amendment Bylaw General Amendments number 2617, and that is 8A3 on the agenda.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Gunn. I'm a planner here at the District of Squamish. As you know, the official community plan was adopted in June 2018. During the adoption process, staff noted corrections and improvements to items that could not be addressed mid-process. Unfortunately, planners are not perfect, and there are errors in the document, and we are trying to identify them and keep the document
Engineers are perfect, but planners.
Engineers are perfect, planners flawed. There were a number of items that we were able to address through the process. Some items, because of the nature of the items, couldn't be addressed. And so we had intended to bring forward an application following adoption to address those items, and that is this application. There are 7 topics to address, and I'm going to go through those now. First off, a number of changes are proposed to Section 9.2 Growth Management Boundary. These changes are intended to ensure that OCP policy language closely aligns with municipal authority while still meeting the intended policy directions of the adopted OCP. Development is still directed within the growth management boundary until substantial completion of residential infill opportunities has been achieved, defined as the district reaching the 34,000 population threshold or construction being completed for 75% of the development potential. The proposal for growth outside growth management boundaries are still only considered if appropriate district policy precursors are adopted and the cost of peripheral growth are outweighed by the community benefit of the project. And the proposal that we're bringing forward also maintains the 22,500 population threshold prior to consideration of any development within future residential neighborhood areas. The significant change is that policy reference to extraordinary community benefits has been removed and replaced with necessary considerations for mitigation and offsetting impacts of future development. The changes are intended to ensure that OCP policy language does not fetter the discretion of future councils, and it is recognized that council ultimately holds discretionary decision-making authority regarding OCP land use and zoning amendments. Section 10.18.a is proposed for amendments to clarify a grammatical error resulting from integration of referral agency feedback during the bylaw adoption process. We had received some input to include a reference to electric vehicles use in a policy regarding transportation emissions. That was integrated, but we did it in a manner that did not make grammatical sense. So, correcting that. 2 additional plan policies are proposed regarding open space within the Squamish Business Park. These policies were included in the original Squamish Business Park sub-area plan and were intended to be included in Bylaw 2500. However, they were missed, so we're bringing those in. They refer to the provision of open space within the business park. And one is in reference to a reserve of an area of land or a small park, and the other is to encourage development of individual parcels to include outdoor spaces for employees. Figure 29.1 in the document is proposed for replacement to correct an error. The error pertains to the artisan building and adjacent single-use parcels. They're in that area. This is a land use plan included in the definitions section. It is intended to match Schedule B, which is the land use designation map schedule. There was a change made through the process to the Schedule B, but this document, which matched it, or was intended to, was not updated. And so there's a disconnect between this set of land use designations and the Schedule B, which is the correct one. So we're proposing to replace this to amend that. Those, the artisan building and adjacent single unit parcels are proposed to be changed to downtown commercial from mixed employment. As well, there is an associated change to the DPA Schedule M, which I'll talk to in a minute, which resulted from the same issue. There's a housekeeping clarification proposed for DPA 3 guidelines. The intent is to clarify that the DPA universal guidelines do not apply to the development at the airport. The intent was to make sure that these universal standards don't apply because the current tenure challenges at the airport make the higher level of development standards seem inappropriate. And so the changes from general guidelines do not apply to DPA 3 guidelines do not apply. There's just a slight wording issue that lacks clarity, so we're cleaning that up. On Schedule B, there are corrections to the land use designations for 2 areas. These are indicated by the black hatching in this image on the screen. The parcels were originally designated limited use in the previous OCP. When the new OCP mapping was created, they became designated facilities, utilities, and transportation corridors, which is an inappropriate designation for these lands. So the intended designation now that is proposed in the bylaw is resource and recreation, which is the replacement for limited use in the new OCP, largely the same language describing those lands. And Schedule M, as I mentioned, this is the map that shows where development permit areas apply across the district. So there are a couple issues to fix in here. Issue 1 pertains to what I just mentioned, the artisan building and adjacent single unit parcels depicted in figure 29.1. The correction should be matched with the correction from DPA 7 downtown south to DPA 5 commercial center. Those are the parcels there for clarity. And then the second issue is with map schedule M again, to expand DPA 10, the intensive and restricted industrial, from its current extent to a larger area to correct a mapping error. Staff intended the less onerous DPA guidelines to apply to this industrial area, and these changes mean that DPA 10 would apply rather than the more onerous DPA 3 universal guidelines, which are not appropriate for a largely industrial area. Staff recommendation is that council approve the following resolutions.
Any questions for staff at this point? We kind of knew we'd have to do this once we did the OCP. We knew we'd have a few tweaks and polishes to do. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommended motion, which is first and second reading? Moved by Councillor Cryer, second by Councillor Elliott. Any comments at this point? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So part of that motion is the public hearing will be held, scheduled for Tuesday, July 24th in council chambers. Thank you very much. Next up is first 3 readings of the District of Squamish Brennan Park Arena Backup Generator Replacement Capital Works Short-Term Borrowing Bylaw number 2616, 2018. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Good evening, Council. My name is Christine Matthews, Chief Financial Officer for the District. Bylaw 2616 is a short-term borrowing bylaw for $115,000 for the Brennan Park Arena Backup Generator. It was part of our 2018 to 2022 financial plan. If we took the rate at the time of this report of 2.14% on the daily floating rate from MFA and assume that we would pay off this annually over the next 5 years, it's a debt service of $24,461 per year. And that basically works out for a single family average home of $822,600 assessment value to be about $1.89 per average house per year. If this were to receive council 3 readings tonight, it would then be sent to the ministry for further approvals.
Thank you. Any questions? See none, would someone like to move the first 3 reading? By Councillor Rees, second by Councillor Kent. Comment?
Yeah, I'm just asking a question. Is there any other way besides borrowing that, this $24,000 is not an insignificant amount of interest to pay over? And I'm just wondering about other interests if we continue borrowing and how much interest in general we're paying on money when we're borrowing. Is there any other pot of funds that this could be taken from?
Why did you choose borrowing as opposed to?
Thank you. Through the mayor, it was actually part of the financial plan review and process, and in order to get the capital plan and taxation values down for 2018, we decided that borrowing would be appropriate for this asset. Just for clarification, the $24,461 includes principal repayment as well for our debt service. So the interest payment is, it's based on a 2.14% per annum, which is generally considered a decent interest rate for short-term borrowing.
Thank you.
Seeing no more hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We will now jump down to adoption of District of Squamish zoning bylaw 2011 amendment bylaw 41601 Brennan Road number 2376 2015.
I have a question.
Yes.
Question for clarification. So we put, one of the conditions of adoption was section 219 no build covenant until the subject property met the requirements of a standard or adequate dike. And then on the next page, we say we've acquired the statutory right of way for that dike, which fulfills that requirement. But does it? Is that an adequate dike? Does it meet the APEG BC requirements? Just because we have the right of way?
My understanding is that the key problem with that is one of the criteria for a standard dike is that there is land tenure by the diking authority for that dike. And I believe that that was the problem. So now that we have land tenure there, it is a standard dike. It is also being upgraded this year to a higher standard. But that, I don't believe that was the issue. The issue was simply that we didn't have land tenure, and now we expropriated that land.
Does that answer your question?
It kind of does. My understanding was that it was an inadequate dike. It wasn't high enough, and we didn't have right of way. So we solved the right of way problem, but it's still an inadequate dike until we build it up.
And I can confirm that that was the problem with inadequacy, is that we didn't have any tenure to it. So that was the key aspect for making it a standard dike.
Is it getting repaired this year?
Sorry?
Well, this was a no-build covenant until we had an adequate dike. Just getting statutory right-of-way doesn't mean that the land on the other side is buildable if it's still a crappy dike. So what I'm wondering is, do we have a truly adequate dike that someone can subdivide their property and build behind?
What is the word?
Adequate dike. Yes, we do. That was always our understanding going into establishing this condition, is that the reason why it wasn't adequate is we had no security around it. We couldn't maintain it. We didn't have any rights to it.
Okay.
So now that we do,
So now we can fix it. It's still inadequate, but we can fix it.
We can upgrade it. That's right. But
Councilor Carr.
And we are upgrading it.
yes.
I mean, it's in the works to upgrade it. It's not just talk.
Correct. This year we have the funding secured.
The process is started, yeah.
We have a motion on the floor. Are there any more questions or comments? Seeing none?
It's not on the floor.
Oh, we don't have a motion on the floor. I thought we did too.
I asked a question.
I'll move it. Is there a second? Second by Councilor Race. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And next up, District of Squamish Building Bylaw number 1822, 2004 Amendment Bylaw 2018 Building Bylaw Update number 2587. The adoption. Moved by Councilor Elliott, seconded by Councilor Fryer. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for seeing through. Corporate Services, District of Squamish 3rd Avenue Pond Remediation Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw. There was can't find it. There was a recommended amendment to this. Do you have it with you? I can't find it.
I do have it.
Okay, you have it. Okay. I don't have it. Char.
Good evening, Council. My name is Charlene Pollock. I'm the Manager of Legislative Services. So I'm here tonight to speak about the alternative approval process for borrowing bylaws 2599 and 2600. So both bylaws received first 3 readings on May 15th and approval from the Inspector of Municipalities on June 19th.
Oh, sorry, keep going. Keep going, I'm sorry. We're on the pond one, right?
Yeah, there's two borrowing bylaws,
Yeah.
one's the pond and one's the TT project. So the purpose of borrowing bylaw 2599 is to borrow $580,800 for improvements to the 3rd Avenue Pond, and the purpose of bylaw 2600 is to borrow over $1 million for the technology transformation project in order to replace and improve office systems. So the community charter requires elector approval for loan authorization bylaws, either by assent of the electors or by the alternate approval process. Statutory motions are required from council to establish the alternate approval process. With the AAP process, electors may indicate that they are opposed to the borrowing bylaws by filling out an elector response form indicating that they are opposed to the bylaw being adopted. So there's a separate form for each bylaw. Electors who are in support of either of the bylaws don't need to do anything. It's a counter petition process, so electors only need to fill out a form if they are opposed. If at the end of the AAP process, at least 10% of the electors of Squamish, established to be 1,353, have responded opposing adoption of the bylaw, then the bylaw must go to referendum before council may consider adoption. If the AAP process is approved by council tonight, 3 ads will be placed in the Squamish Chief, advising of the process, and information will be included on the website and at Municipal Hall. The deadline to submit a response form has been established as Monday, August 20th, and that date, pursuant to the community charter, must be at least 30 days following the second ad. So we are running an extra ad in the paper in August and have added a week onto the response time because it's summer. And then following the AAP process, a report will be brought to council informing of the results. And I handed out a revised elector response form for bylaw 2599. I noticed a typo on the form, so I fixed that, and that's why that was handed out. And the agenda includes recommendations for each of the 2 bylaws.
Questions about both bylaws? Councilor Mace?
Thank you. In both cases, the last line is a fair determination of the total number of eligible electors of the District of Squamish is 1,353. That wouldn't be the total number of electors, that's the number of people required to oppose it?
That's right, that's 10% of the total number of votes.
Do we have to say that, or is this part of the resolution, or is that just?
I think it's a fair determinant. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Is it part of the motion, or is it just for information?
It is part of the motion.
Okay.
So we could add in 10%.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, I missed, what are we going to
Add a determination of total number of electoral elected at Squamish is a comma, 10%.
Yeah, so the last line of the motion
okay.
is 1,353, which is 10% of the...
And that will go to both resolutions. So I'll
move the first one?
Sure.
Seconded by Councillor Elliott. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And for the second one, the Transformation Project Capital Works Loan Authorization Block 2600, 2018. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Elliott. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. This is something we have to do every year for borrowing. So, thank you. Technically, the next one, we don't need a motion of council. It is within our policy to staff can award this tender. Council wants to be redundant, we can consider it. If you just want to move on, I'm happy to do that as well. See any hands? Next up is DP number 482, 37782 3rd Avenue. You have public again?
Well, is it the same one? Which one is it?
3rd Avenue.
It's for 3rd Avenue.
Yeah.
37784.
Is that Mike's?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Mike's. It might do. That might, yes. And why do you have to go? You have to
I got to do a burning copy.
You do. How many cupcakes have you had so far?
Is it because he owns adjacent property?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton, planner here at the district, presenting to you today development permit application 482 located at 37762 3rd Avenue. A rezoning for this property was first brought to council on November 15, 2016 to rezone the property to C10 in order to accommodate 11 townhouse units with a commercial flex space at grade. The rezoning received first and second reading, but was defeated at third reading on December 6, 2016. A rezoning submission was received later that month, and a bylaw amendment to rezone the property from light industrial to a new zone, Creative Mixed Use District 2, MUD 2, was adopted on December 19, 2017. Given that the development permit application was made prior to adoption of the new OCP, Bylaw 2500, 2017, the DP application has to be assessed under the old DPA guidelines in place at the time of application. So 37762 3rd Avenue is located in the southern part of downtown Squamish. The lands are now zoned Creative Mixed Use District, MUD 2, and are subject to development permit guidelines for downtown south. This is DPA 3. At present, the parcel has one occupied single-family home located on the site, and directly to the south is a commercial light industrial building, while the parcel to the north is a mini storage facility, both zoned light industrial, I1. To the west, across 3rd Avenue, a vacant lot is zoned general industrial, I3. So DPA 482 seeks to allow for the construction of a 5-story mixed-use residential artisan development consisting of 17 residential units on the top 3 floors and 455 meters squared of double-story height artisan spaces on the ground floor. Residential units proposed are a mix of studio and 1-bedroom apartments on the 3rd story and double-story 2-bedroom units on the 4th and 5th story with 2 micro-suites. The artisan spaces have loading bay doors, access to the rear, and glass overhead doors and at the entrances fronting 3rd Avenue. The development conforms to MUD 2 zoning requirements and makes use of 2 density bonus provisions. One is the 5-meter ground level ceiling heights to increase the overall building height from 10.68 meters to 15.6 meters. And the second one is the 20% dedicated rental to increase the ratio of residential square footage from 50% to 70%. And that's in the green here. So all vehicle parking is accessed off the laneway, while pedestrian pathway along the north lot line maintains a mid-block connection from the laneway to 3rd Avenue. All 17 residential parking stalls are provided along with 4 commercial parking stalls directly lined up with each commercial bay door at the rear. 3 commercial stalls will be cash in lieu as per the bylaw, and 1 on-street loading bay will be provided along 3rd Avenue. As this is the creative mixed-use district zone, I'd like to take a moment just to highlight some of the creative elements of this development. The residential facades are articulated by a series of repeating bays, referencing the architectural language of industrial buildings and warehouses. The yellow guardrail accents on the 4th story balconies provide a pop of color to the otherwise subdued residential component. It is envisioned that the loading bay doors in the rear would be custom painted with graphics, logos, and colors by each tenant, providing some vibrancy to the laneway facade. And the parking area includes a freestanding canopy structure in the rear to provide weather coverage to vehicles and to provide lighting to the parking lot and laneway. The pedestrian pathways, commercial parking stalls, and rear laneway parking have also been incorporated some playful pavement markings, as you can see in some of the site plans. The vibrant red corrugated steel frontage facades along 3rd Avenue open onto a widened sidewalk, inviting public interaction with a market-like atmosphere for local artisans, and to use this space to exhibit and sell their wares. Pairs of tall timber posts are accented with steel details referencing Squamish's industrial heritage and articulating the artisan units. The development includes a rooftop patio, proposing trellis seating, fire pit seating, and garden planting areas. DP 482 was presented to the district's Squamish's Advisory Design Panel on May 17, 2018. The committee was highly supportive of the project, with a few important revisions left to be resolved with staff. These revisions include increasing rooftop patio amenities, adding creative elements to the rear parking area, and modifying the streetscape to accommodate a consistent downtown south look. I've spoken to how the first two elements have been addressed. The last streetscape comment was addressed by adding more street trees, as you can see here in the slide, and the identification of a consistent street tree for the downtown south, known as a funky ginkgo tree species. ADP meeting minutes can be found in attachment 2. So in summary, the proposal generally meets DPA 3 guidelines for form and character, and the highlights include that there's a high quality and varied building materials, there's a facilitation of pedestrian access through the site, there's a front-facing building with parking located at the rear laneway. The primary siding of the corrugated steel proposed does not comply with those 2010 guidelines. However, the siding does convey this feeling of quality and permanence, which is also a part of this guideline, and is well suited to this creative neighborhood, so is supported by staff. So in sum, the project was posted to the district's development showcase in March of 2018, and no comments have been received to date. So staff's recommendation is for council to approve the following recommendation: that the district Squamish authorize the development permit for number 482 for the property located at 37782 3rd Avenue, subject to the provision of bonding for phased landscaping and for the provision of $45,000 cash in lieu in place of those 3 commercial parking stalls. And staff is recommending that this amount be placed in the alternative forms of transportation reserve fund. And that's to address transportation options of sidewalks and bike lanes in the downtown south neighborhood. This is the district's truck route in purple, as you can see here, runs through the downtown south on Vancouver Street and 3rd Avenue, and portions of these streets have sidewalks and have designated on-street parking infrastructure. However, the vast majority of these streetscapes remain undeveloped and unconnected. Increased sidewalk connectivity and curbing along these truck routes would not only increase pedestrian safety, but would also help delineate on-street parking to reduce disruption of the truck route activity. These funds are not sufficient to make any significant improvements at this time, however, can be reserved for future alternative transportation works as this neighborhood continues to redevelop and evolve.
Thank you. Questions regarding the DP? I see no hands. Would someone like to move? I'll move the DP, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Just very quickly, I think this is, I think it looks like a really cool, interesting project. It's come a long way from that first iteration. I think it will be a great addition to this neighborhood. Looking forward to it. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Pryor, please. Unless he's got another conflict. Being as this is our second meeting with the consent agenda, does council want an opportunity to put their minds to whether they want anything pulled from it? Should we take a 2-minute recess to allow council to do that? Would council like a 2-minute recess? Okay. 2-minute recess to see if council would like anything pulled from the consent agenda.
Starting with your...
We're back in our regular business meeting for July 3rd, and we're on the consent agenda. I don't necessarily want to pull it, but I wouldn't mind having staff just comment. The ADP didn't have quorum. That doesn't typically happen. Are we concerned about that, or was it just sort of an anomalous situation?
For you, Mayor, so we've recently the district has increased the membership on the ADP. I think it's just summer as being one of the kind of occasional problems that we have during the season. I think if it continues to be a problem, then we need to look at doing something about it. But I think I would give it a bit more a try before we fix it.
And I just wanted to highlight our Mayor for a Day wrote a lovely letter. Very sweet. She was a great little Mayor for a Day. Anything else to be pulled from the consent agenda? Oh yeah, we are going to pull the very first item from the RCMP, the very first letter. And Ms. Wendy and I will speak to that, but that pulled, someone want to move the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Black and Wolf. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. That brings us all the way down to latest agenda correspondence. And we have items pulled from consent agenda later, right?
Yeah, so the one that you pulled, we would do under.
This is a new process, so I'm just getting my brain going.
So we would do it
There, okay. So first up, 11A1, we have a request from Court Ashbaugh from Quest University that we write a letter of support for their application for the Rural Dividend Fund for a Creating Applied Learning Studio project. Somebody like to move the letter of support? Moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Chappelle. Sounds like a great initiative. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a deadline on that, so we'll try to get to that as soon as possible. Next up, there was a recommendation from this morning, sorry, this afternoon, feels like a long time ago now, this afternoon's Community Development Standing Committee, and there's a recommendation that Council direct staff to initiate option 1 immediately for the 3rd Avenue pond remediation, and the Council commit in principle to budget up to an additional $410,000 to fund off-site storm work and related site preparation as outlined in the MOU with BC Housing for Under One Roof project, with funds payable to BC Housing as budget allows, and further that staff bring back a strategy for funding this additional project cost to support amending the 2018-20 to 2022 financial plan before the end of October. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Elliott. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I think we're all pretty excited for that project to proceed. There was one letter pulled, and Ms. Glenda, do you want to speak to, there's an incorrect.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Huntsman. The letter we receive annually for the RCMP, which is shown on the agenda, is the annual multi-year financial plan that they provide the district for council to approve in principle. It's not a funding commitment, but because their fiscal is different than ours, it starts in March. It's for their planning purposes only. That said, when I look at the detail in 2019 to 2020, they have an additional member indicated, 26, which is an error. And so I've gone back to the RCMP and I'm in the midst of talking to them about correcting this spreadsheet essentially with the additional costs. Further, there are some that are a concern that are going up quite substantially. Administration costs is an example, and again, I'm going to follow up with them on what's driving those things.
Yeah, my concern was there was a $403,000 increase proposed for next year, which is 1.7% tax increase in 1 year. Take out the mistake that there's a new constable next year, and I don't think we anticipate that until 2022, so it's 3 years down the road. That's still a significant increase, and so I think we need to have a conversation about what's driving that. There was one in there about administrative costs going up almost $100,000. So I think a conversation with the RCMP is in order. Did I see a hand up on this side? Councillor Strong.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if we're keeping track of density, and as we densify the community, there are impacts to RCMP and fire, and if that's being kept track of as far as increases in our needs, fire department and RCMP.
The RCMP has a comprehensive, The RCMP has a comprehensive human resources plan that they prepare based on our population and policing needs, and then the fire master plan as well addresses that. And we continue to make them fluid and organic because of the rapid change.
Thank you.
That's correct.
listened to an article on the radio today about Surrey looking at policing their own police force. Listened to all sorts of reasons why. So I know that conversation should come to us again because I guess the RCMP are good at rural areas. They're kind of designed to manage rural areas where there wasn't a population big enough to have their own police force. But in a lot of communities, they're not doing the job that the community needs.
Okay, so we'll have that conversation with the RCMP in the near future. Would you like us to refer this to staff to follow up with RCMP? I'll move that. For second by Councillor Race. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We haven't pulled any minutes. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Councillor Pryor?
Well, the last, I didn't see it in the minutes, but we had conversation going about the deforestation on the highway under the Sandman there, or the, whatever the hotel is. That was supposed to come back to us, and I never saw anything.
That was on minutes previous to this meeting.
Minutes previously?
Yeah.
No, I missed part of the meeting.
I thought staff was just going to, I thought their staff already did send us a response.
They did, but I can double check that.
I thought we were going to have a discussion about it.
There's an existing policy.
Okay, still going on, it's not resolved?
No, there's an existing direction that the developer, according to staff, adhered to. And so unless, if you'd like to talk to me about putting something on the agenda specifically, but the current situation is addressed, is it not?
Sorry, this is the clearing in front of the Sandman, is that correct? Yes, we did look at it in detail, and the clearing that they did exactly matched the vegetation plan that is on the covenant on the property. So what they did was exactly what they were supposed to do.
They're allowed to do.
No, it was perfect.
Yeah. They aced it.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I want to dig out the minutes to when that was approved, because never was it allowed for them to clear cut.
Yes, it was. I voted against it, but yes, it was. Anyway, it's covenanted on the land. It's not something that's a reasonable discussion.
I sat through all those meetings.
Moving on, council staffing calendar announcements. We don't have any. Unscheduled public comments, there is none. Open question period clarification related to agenda items. Anybody? Council or staff announcements. We had a wonderful Canada Day downtown on Sunday. Thanks to BIA and all the organizers for putting that on. I don't think what else happened in the last week from that organized. Anybody else have something while I look at my notes? And coming up, I wanted just a shout out to the Squamish bike event. I gather it was fantastic. Really good feedback from participants, and I think they're doing a great job of filling the big footsteps that the Testamental left on that weekend. So good for Dwayne and his crew. And my brain has stopped functioning because we've been here for a long time. Anyone else have any announcements? What's coming up? Beer Festival this weekend?
Kite Clash.
That's all that matters. That's this weekend downtown Squamish. Anyway, happy summer. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Wolf. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.